everybody. It is me, Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works. We have Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios. And today, as our special guest, we have Nikki Adamkowitz, the Sassy Subber, once again.
I'm so sorry. This is part two of this series.
This is part two. We're basically
part two.
Continue the conversation that we had a week ago.
Yeah, we were getting into it.
My brain works sometimes. It's like a week ago. But why
don't you do a recap of what we were talking about last week?
Oh, see? It's a good thing she's here.
You know what? Sometimes you just need a little help from a friend. That's all.
I definitely need that. So last week we were talking about artwork for embroidery, and we were going over some designs, talking about details that would have to be removed and added back in. And Justin should have that file. Good, because I don't have it up in my software yet.
Oh, this is going to be great. Happy Tuesday.
You know, the worst part about Tuesday is realizing it's still a Monday.
Oh, yes. Mondays on a Tuesday are terrible. I think that's the worst thing. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right. So last week we were going over, we had the butterfly design up. I remember having that up. Or we had the gnome.
We actually did both last week.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
See? I mean, at least I remember what file we were talking about.
Do you need help? Okay, so last week we had a conversation about me as a digital designer and how we could take my artwork and make it into embroidery. And some of the things that you run up against as a designer, but even so, some of the stuff that you guys run up against with your clients. Your client has these big dreams of having all their stuff embroidered. And then as a digitizer, they have to back it up and go, wait, we can't do everything. Some things need to change. They have to know what you're doing it on, what it's got to do, the whole 9 yards. But from a digitizer or from a designer's point of view, that can be a struggle because I love shades and gradients and all the fun stuff, all the bells and whistles. So what that does is it now makes a fight between me and the digitizer about trying not to lose the quality of the design or the integrity of the design once we hand it over to a digitizer. Did that help?
That did.
See, this is why they keep you around.
So as a digitizer, you're definitely going to have to make some decisions for the interpretation from taking it from print or a design into an embroidery. But a lot of times there is some disconnect between our customers or the end customer and what we're trying to do. So we're just trying to take it at an angle of if you are an artist or if you have an in-house artist, they can just design from the get-go, knowing the limitations of embroidery, and that way they're showing the end user something that's closer to what's going to be the end result for embroidery, instead of just kind of taking what they already have and try to tell them roundabouts what's going to be simplified or not.
I mean, or they could also create alternate logos, because I've seen that in brand guides that you see with some companies, is where they'll have their main logo, they'll have their logo for print, they'll have their logo for embroidery, they'll have their logo for, usually when I see a brand guide, it covers just about everything.
Yeah, absolutely. We do a lot of work with the university here in Tucson, U of A, and they actually have rules in different versions for depending on if you're using it in print, embroidery, online, whatever it may be. And they understand the limitations that the designs with the very teeny tiny sub 3 millimeter text, they do without that text in the embroidery version. So yeah, when you have corporate brand guides or brand guides of any sort that have already thought about those things of what can and can't be used in certain situations, that's definitely a plus.
Yep.
I
mean, it helps. It helps with all of that stuff. But you also get going. I mean, you were just talking about having a designer in-house. Not everybody has that luxury. So, you also have to work on that relationship with a designer and your digitizer so that you guys all get on the same page. And I haven't done embroidery in a hot minute. So for me, it's more of a struggle because you guys have seen some of my work. It's really detailed. So learning to scale it back on my end, and knowing what's going to work and what's not going to work. I'm learning. I'm definitely learning. And I can now look at some things and go, yeah, that's not going to work. And before it even comes out of either one of your mouths, like, Nikki, that's not going to work, I'm already going, okay, I got to scale that back a little bit. So, just work on those relationships if you are a digitizer, work on those relationships with your your designers too. So I don't know. It's you guys have a different roadmap than I have.
And even in the design world, I do vector art and stuff as well as digitizing. But over the years, it was solely for designing for screen printing. So I understood separations and spot colors and stuff like that. Now there's the world of DTG and all these different types of transfers. And so when someone says, I need this design, usually they say, I need vector art of this design. And they're giving me this design with a billion colors. And it's like, how are you printing this first? And
right.
Like, oh, on the DTG. Well, then you don't need vector.
Right.
You
right.
may need this design cleaned up or redone or whatever it may be, but don't need vector art. So a lot of times it's just a matter of even understanding terminology and how you're going to produce this design in the production side of things. So the designer or the digitizer or whatnot understands the full scope of your project.
Right. I mean, I have a Roland, so I print on my EcoSolvent printer, so I can print, everything but white that you're printing on white vinyl. So it is definitely vastly different from going from this world to, a sublimation world to EcoSolvent printing now over to the digitizing. It's a lot to try to figure out, but that's something you got to ask your client in general. What are we putting this on? What,
right.
How big do you think you want this design? Because that's another one that I come in, constant as a question. Oh, I only want it for the left, the left chest. Okay, great. Or no, I want it centered in the middle of the shirt. Well, okay, what are you putting on, kids or are you putting on adults? Like, there's a lot of questions. It can't just be, oh, I just need this.
Right.
End of story.
Exactly.
There's a lot more to it.
Well, and even then, you still need a specific resolution. You can't take
100%.
96 dpi.
300 dpi is the minimum. And for the stuff that I do, you need at least 300 dpi when you're working with anything. It helps everybody all the way around, no matter which form you're printing in, whether it's screen print transfers, whether it's, the direct to film, sublimation, heat transfer, right through, the digitizing. You really do need a cleaned up version. So, Yep.
Exactly.
We have somebody watching from the Blue Goose Mexican Cantina in Fort Worth, Texas.
That sounds fun.
Yeah. It's Tuesday. It's Mexican Day. Right?
It's Tuesday. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. It's definitely alcohol time for sure. But we'll grab a couple of comments. We have Minnesota watching from northern Minnesota, custom made. It's Barb LaFond watching from north central Minnesota. We have Ramona who watches from Illinois. Mike Muldowney from Canada. Hi, driving and listening. We have
it's usually different. Yep, that's Shalada.
Mm-hmm. Hello. We have Rich watching from Lake Stevens, Washington. Bobby just says sassy. So there you go.
From Texas.
And watching from the Blue Goose Mexican Cantina in Fort Worth, Texas. And we have, I feel bad because I've met her in person and I still look at the name and I don't want to pronounce it wrong. So I'm sorry if I do. It's Mahadi from California. Masheed.
See, you'll get it.
I was totally wrong. I was like, that's not her name, I don't think. But we have Letty saying hello. And we have a couple of comments here that I'm going to circle back to. We have Ramona saying, as a production machine operator who outsources digitizing, how do I know what can and can't work so that I can work with the customer?
Well, I think it's just a matter of just as even a digitizer, the years and years and years of practice and seeing, how small elements can work, how small text can work in the given situation, given garment. I think it's just a matter of repetition, of understanding what can and can't work. especially if you are the person that's seeing the incoming artwork and seeing what the end result is coming from the digitizer. If you demand that every single detail is in there and you get it back and you sew it out and it sews horribly, and then they send you a second design with a simplified version that they're suggesting, you can kind of see the difference. And I think over time, you're going to start recognizing, all right, things like this aren't going to work for embroidery. Things like this aren't going to work for 3D puff embroidery. They know that if you get 5mm text on a hat and someone's requesting 3D puff, right off the bat, you're going to say, all right, these elements can't work. Do we do the design just 3D puff, leave the rest of it, flat embroidery, eliminate the text for hats, all the different the options that you can look into. But like I said, I think it's just repetition and time, talking to your digitizer. And this is where I think this particular live is kind of covering the relationship between a designer and a digitizer, is when you don't have that and a digitizer is trying to convey to the end customer what needs to be simplified. There isn't that option of me creating the design all over first in art to show you all the things that we need to simplify. So you need to have trust in your digitizer, if they are a good digitizer, and you'll start recognizing the things that you can and can't do and the limitations.
Well, Ken, before you get to any more of the questions, remember, we had a conversation today. So just to tell you the vast difference, I was doing name tags for sublimation, and I want to say there was probably 22 letters that had to go in a 3-inch space. And Justin came back with, there is no way. It's like, that is not going to work for embroidery, trying to get 22 letters in a 3-inch space and have it be legible. Like, this is where you start to learn. So yeah, it works for sublimation, and it's tricky even with sublimation to try to, so that you could read it and not have it scale down too much and all of that. I can only imagine what they would have to try to do to bring it over into embroidery. Now, I will bring up, this is what she was asking for the new person. Are there any standards and guidelines, just to go up with her comment?
Well, I mean, to go along with that name issue, and there's actually a customer just yesterday was talking to me about this. Their customers coming to them saying, I want 1/2-inch lettering on a sleeve. And if that 1/2-inch lettering says the name of a town, like Tucson, that would work fine. But when there's first and last names, titles underneath at 1/2-inch lettering, another big thing is proportions that you need to explain to people. 1/2-inch lettering with 3 letters is going to fit. 1/2-inch lettering with 15 letters is not going to fit on a sleeve. That's going to end up being, 7 inches wide.
Yeah, you're going to end up with it right around the whole edge of your arm.
Right.
Yeah.
So there is times where you're even, especially when there's a long list of names, because you can have Ed Jones as a name, and then you can have a name that has first and last names that both have 10 letters each. So you have to make a decision like, okay, do we pick a standard size lettering that's going to fit the longest name in wherever you're trying to do it? Do you adjust it when it's only a long name? So it's just a matter of deciding if you want it uniform with every single shirt to be the exact same height of the letters. Well, then you're going to have to, find a standard that's going to fit all the length of the names. Do you not mind that the person with the longer name has a little bit smaller text than the rest of them? There's times where, you can say, all right, 1/2-inch is going to work, but on these longer names, if you just change the width and not just the size proportionately, that name's going to look really, really crammed and kind of scrunched up. So there is limitations as far as just size-wise in trying to keep it uniform, what you're going to do to decide. Do you split longer names into 2 lines and stuff like that?
Now, is it where you pretty much create your own standard so that no matter I'm assuming that your standard may be different than Jeff's standard, just as in general, as to how you're going to approach all of your clients? Is that a true assumption? Because I know here in my side of the world, we say you create your own standard and then stick with that. You figure out what's the most common last name that you've had the longest of and how you can make that work. Does that hold true also in embroidery? And I don't know. I'm asking that question.
I think, working in 2 different embroidery houses over my career, I think typically when the embroiderer is going to have the capability of actually doing names in-house, where they're not sending out a list of names to a digitizer and asking them to digitize every single one in a special font, or even asking them to set them up in stock fonts. It's going to rely on the software that they have in-house. And what I've seen is, depending on your software, you're going to have that block letter, that simple, sans serif block that you're going to like to use because it sells well. You're going to have the serif block, and then you're going to have a script. And then those three standards that they have and that they like to use, they're going to have a certain size that they know works in general and works on average, and then adjust from there.
Okay.
So yeah, as far as standards, I've seen it where people say, block names, all capital letters, are, can be anywhere from, 8 millimeter to 10 millimeter tall is the standard that they start from. So
that may be something that you guys could come up with what, a standard, guidelines for people, because you are getting new embroidery people who are coming to your group. That might be something to have somewhere if you don't. I mean, with all of your years in the industry, Justin, that might be something for you to have just as a guide for people. It's something, I know as a newbie I would want.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. That's very true.
Just a thought.
I think Jeff is hard at work looking at his digitizing screen right now.
I know. He's doing something. He's ignoring us. Do you see this? There's just ignoring there.
We got a comment here from Mike. I wish designers would trust the Pantone book and pick colors from thread charts or even print screen. I absolutely agree with you. Not really digitizing issue, but it helps production down the line and have a matched weird obscure Pantone color with 300 threads. Exactly. We're actually running into that right now, where someone has kind of that corporate guideline and they have all these Pantone or hex numbers and stuff like that, which Matthew did build a great online tool for that. What is
that matches it, right? It's the thread converter, right? Where
exactly.
You can. Okay.
Exactly, thread converter. But even then, yeah, it's Pantone is kind of the general use of the industry that everybody kind of relies on picking threads. But like Madeira, I know there's certain threads they actually have a Pantone match to, and then there's certain threads that they just don't. So that's another thing. Matching the print world to the embroidery world doesn't always happen exact. So that is an issue.
Yeah, and that's something that would be useful for anybody. So good job, Matthew. Good job, Matthew. I know I'm not the best Matthew stand-in for the week, but that's okay, you guys. Hopefully he'll be back next week, and then I won't be standing in.
So I think we could maybe get into which design did you want to take a look at, Jeff? The gnome one?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Let me get it pulled up here. If you refresh my memory, I can't remember what size we were doing this at.
I don't know. I know we were talking about just the details in there, and you were going to do some embroidery. And then there was on the one with the flowers, he was going to let you have it designing the flowers for the butterfly. So pick either one you want. And then I've got questions as you're doing it.
Sure thing. All right. Little gnome.
So I'm going to come to you, Justin. I'm going to go say, Justin, I want to have this embroidered. What is the first thing you're going to say to me?
First thing I'm going to ask you is what we're putting it on and what size. So I know what we're talking about.
Okay, so I want it on the left chest. We're going to go with small. Yep.
Okay. So
go small because I know what we can do when it's bigger. I want you to talk about it when it's smaller.
Okay, so the next conversation that I have with the customer is, okay, left chest standard, when something's a little bit taller than it is wide, is typically right around 3 inches. So if 3-inch works for you, then we'll go with that. And then from there, I can kind of look at it and say, all right, well, at 3 inches, there's a lot on this design that's not going to be, included in embroidery. Like we spoke about last week, the main thing is going to be the the ladybugs. There is something where I could possibly include some red shapes in here, but as far as the fact that I can't get these small little black dots, the
Right.
small little heads on them, they're just going to look like red blobs. So it's probably a good idea to eliminate something like that altogether. I know we talked about possibly taking this ladybug with the little motion lines,
bigger.
Making it larger, whether it's across the hat or coming off the side of his head or something like that. Just to include one of the ladybugs, that would be definitely a good idea.
So I would say to you, okay, take the ladybugs off the flowers, but I really want some detail in the hair. I want it to look like hair when you're doing that. That's a stickler. I don't want it just to look like two blobs hanging there. I would like some dimension with the hair. Is that possible?
Right. So, and again, a lot of times, I'll make decisions with designs to the best of what I think is going to look best for embroidery. If there is somebody that is concerned about details like that, and I'll ask them, okay, we can do this one of two ways. We can have it where there's actually detail lines that are going to come through as far as detail running stitches. That's going to be a second color, like say a tan color with the hair being white. That will define edges, or I could actually just use different stitch types at different angles that are going to hit the light differently. That are going to give you a more natural look. When you look at someone's hair, you don't see outlines of every little strand where your eye catches it. It's going to catch all the hairs that are catching the light at different angles and different sheens and whatnot.
Right.
So yeah, the fact that this is kind of a cartoony look to it, it's not really hard edge lines to this. I could very well just make every single bit of detail in here just black running stitches, and it's going to look like, it's outlined in a pen. But to get the kind of look and the feel that it's going for, I would definitely try to come in here and just use different satin stitches at different angles, intertwined with each other. That's going to catch the light and give you a more natural look.
Okay. So it doesn't have to be, necessarily be flat. You can add dimension so it shows kind of movement is, I guess. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because there's a way of me looking at this and say, okay, the simplest form of getting this design into stitch form, I could say, all right, there's white hair, there's white flowers, there's yellow middle of the flowers, there's a gray hat, and there's red elements.
Right.
So with those few colors, I can just lay down stitches, fill stitches to get you those shapes in those colors. And it's going to be looking like a flat, no dimension, no detail, very rudimentary version of this design.
But I'm going to be whiny and I want dimension and I want color. So you got to make it happen. I mean, I know you and I both know we've had those clients where it's like, I don't care what you have to do, make it happen. So where do you take this and still make me happy enough to where it's going to look close enough to that as the client? Because I'm looking at that going, and from what you just said, I'm going to lose everything. Right. Unfortunately, we have those clients. They feel like they're going to lose everything, all the integrity of the design. So
and from on my day-to-day workload, I can get a ton of corporate designs that are super simple. It might be like a big area that's a filled area with an outline with some text to it. On something like that, I'm not going to necessarily look at it and say, ooh, I really need to get some dimension in here. I need to get some shadowing. I need to do this. It's a very corporate kind of cold look to it. Something like this, it's obviously coming from an artistic feel. So as a digitizer, I'm going to look at it and say, all right, I can do this one of 10 ways to get some good dimension, not hammer it with a ton of stitches, not just outlining everything in black to make your lines visible, and I could add some artistic value to this.
Okay.
Like Eric says here, you don't draw every leaf to represent a tree because people themselves are a tremendous amount of trouble packing it into too much detail. Exactly. So all these leaves on these flowers, I'm not going to digitize every single individual one. I know, like Jeff and I discussed last week, something like that. There's probably maybe 50 individual petals on this flower here. We're not going to digitize every single one.
I can only imagine how long that took to draw every one of those petals.
No.
No, thank God for the art world. That's all I have to say. The rest of the gnome is completely all hand drawn by me. But you can go in the digital design world, you can go grab elements, and that's what that's called, and you can go grab them. So the flowers, the basket, and are not in there, but the rest it's all hand drawn by me using a mouse. Don't ask. But I have a Wacom now, so it's making life a lot easier.
So one interpretation of this is I can come in here and say, I see a gray hat. I see this shape, and I know it needs to be gray, and I'm not going to be exactly right on because I'm just doing this quickly. But I could just do a fill stitch at an angle that I know works, start and stop points, turn it to gray, and voila. I have a nice hat, right? Exactly. You look on the face of the designer, and she's looking at it like, no, that is a blob of stitches.
That's not fun. And you know what? I can't even hide my facial expression on this one either. That's the sad part. I look at it going, oh God, that's ugly.
You just throw an outline around it.
Exactly.
You know what? That's going to determine whether or not you have a good digitizer and a fantastic digitizer, because the digitizer knows, just knowing that is not what I'm going to want.
And so I'm going to come in here, and since you didn't like that, and I'm just going to quickly say, oh, you know what? I'm going to give you some detail lines. Of course, that was very rudimentary.
That's okay. I got you.
I'm going to give you some detail lines. Now we're good, right? No?
Keep working, buddy. Keep working. Earn your money, because that a toddler could do that better.
Exactly. So again, if this was a corporate design, I might have just done that element in one fill and be done with it. Adding a satin border just to have a clean, nice edge. But something like this, I'm going to definitely come in here and create layers and different stitch angles and different elements, so it's going to catch the light differently. And again, people, I'm just doing this quickly just to...
And from a designer's point of view, this intrigues the heck out of me. I love watching them do this, because they're changing what I had originally thought it to be on. So towels and pillowcases and shirts and all of that stuff, which you still can do in embroidery, but it was also made for mugs, which you can't. So to see them change something that I worked hours on to sit there and draw that hat alone was painstaking to get all the shades and the gradients the way I wanted it to. So to see them change this into a different form. Sorry.
So this would be one way to start and just kind of seeing the individual little folds of the hats to kind of get and Wilcom will kind of give you that.
Well, couldn't you come in with that, and let's say you did the filled stitch the way you did the beginning, but then you come in and add a dimension and curve it in on the top of that, but with a little bit thicker lines, so it just kind of so if you took that and made that more into following, do you know what I mean? I hope.
So yes, I actually would do something like that, where I would come in either in a second color or even in the same color. I would just kind of add these elements that are going to shape and shade at the same time. So
I think even just adding them in the same color, once you do that, I think it's going to just add just a dimension to it.
Right.
Yeah. So now change that all to black, and I bet it's exactly what I have in my head. Which that's hard when you're having the design. Yeah. See, that's a little better. For me, that's better. Now it's starting to show the texture and everything.
Right, exactly. So yeah, something like that would probably be the approach that I would do. So you do have some coverage in the fill area.
100% better.
Yeah, just doing those little elements, kind of seeing where those are coming in with the shading and whatnot. And even if you really wanted to do them in a second color.
I mean, you could, but I like the black on black because that's what the hat is, and it has that look that looks more so like what I have done, and that's the problem. I mean, I sit and I create this thing, and then he's going to come in and go, well, okay, this is what I was thinking, and I still have to look at it and think it looks the same, you know, but different, you know.
But yeah, you know, zooming in here, I can count at least 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4, if not 5 different shades of gray. In a 3-inch, you know, design where the hat again now is only a third of that, which is now an inch tall. I'm not going to get 5 different color grays, and some of it's going to be time and stitches that you're not going to even see because they're so small. So yeah.
I see Cindy's question, and I want to address that real quick. So the designs that the boys are using are ones that I made for sublimation. I didn't have the intent ever to have them be digitized. And after being approached by numerous digitizers, I decided to go with the guys to have them do my stuff. So that's where it's different. Some of the stuff that I'm going to create moving forward, I do know there's a lot of details I won't be working on because of that reason. I know where it's headed now, but a lot of the stuff that they're using to create this particular type of item was strictly made for sublimation at one point. So yeah, I do get it. I do get it. I do a lot of research. I spend a lot of time researching. I probably drive them crazy with the amount of research that I do when it comes to this stuff, because I want to get it right. I don't want to be spending 1,000 hours recreating the wheel here if I could do it once and then we keep right on going about our day. So I totally get that.
Right. And a lot of times you got to remember, designs aren't designed from the get-go with embroidery in mind. Very, very, very seldom is it done with embroidery as the sole intent or the first intent. A lot of times designs are created to represent a company, a team, or whatever it may be. And then from there, they're like, okay, we need merchandise. We need mugs. We need hats. We need screen printed tees. We need this. We need that. And then they start running into, you know, if this is the design of a company, say, and they say, oh, we want this design on a pen. Well, that pen printer is going to say, yeah, no.
Unless you're sublimation, and then I can say yes.
if you want the name of the pen, of your company on the pen, then the length of the pen, then yes, you can do that.
And that's all you have to ask your clients. What is it going to be used for? So when they're asking me to create artwork, I have a list of questions. What do you ever plan on putting this logo on? How do you plan on representing your brand or this design? Is it just a shirt design that you want to do and it's a home use kind of thing? Or is this for a company, team, whatever the case may be? You have to do your due diligence and investigate what this is going on. So you're not reinventing the wheel and doing this 800 times, and you give them all the files that they're going to need for all the things that they're going to have to do. That's why doing designs as a designer, you have to ask all those crazy questions.
Right, exactly. Now, same with the sunflower here. You know,
Daisy, but keep going.
I'm trained to call every flower a sunflower.
It's not. Keep going. Daisy.
I was thinking Daisy.
But I also see that so if I were to redesign this, I would make those petals a little bit bigger, just because, especially if I knew I was going to be, you know, heading it over to you guys, I would have gone in and I would have changed how those looked so that you guys could go there and have a lot easier of a time, because I don't want you guys having to take 400 hours to do something either. So, you know, I would have gone in and changed that, tweaked it. And that's where the design would really have changed, because it wouldn't be a huge petal looking daisy. It might be your common looking daisy that you see in the clip art world. You could still do a lot of petals, but they might be a little bit thicker.
Right. So going through here, and if I measured each individual petal, and that one's like almost 2.5 millimeters wide. We have almost 1 millimeters wide. So technically, size-wise, yes, all these individual petals at its thickest point could be digitized. Now, if you get down here and you start getting into where it meets the center, they are getting 1 millimeter. And so if I were to try to digitize every single one of these petals, by the time they start coming in and meeting each other down in this area, you're just going to have a ton of small stitches all sewing on top of each other. So now you're going to be looking into thread breaks and needle breaks and something that's bulletproof. So you're going to have this nice thick piece of embroidery that's probably going to be, make it wavy, make it kind of distorted, just overall issues. So that's where, again, we're going to have to interpret it and say, all right, let's do every other petal as far as size wise and scale up that petal to that, the thickness of or the width of 2 of them. And that way we can still kind of have a nice array, but we're not going to do as many shoved into a small area.
So I want to point something out here that not a lot of people think about when we talk about, kind of the limit of how small you can go. It's really the limitation you're running into is the size of your needle. So at point, your needle is 0.75 millimeters wide at the blade of the needle. And when you're dropping a hole in the fabric, it's cutting a hole 0.75 millimeters wide. And then you're coming over, and if you go under 0.75 millimeters wide, there's a good chance that that tip of that needle is going to grab into the exact same hole, and you're just going to tear a larger hole and drop a stitch down in there. Now, when you drop a stitch down inside, 2 stitches down inside the same hole, those can start building up and actually cause bird nests. So that's why when we look at this, people say, oh, well, it's small detail. You go to 60 weight thread, which is good. You go to 60 weight thread. But when you go to 60 weight thread, you also drop down to a 65/9 needle, which gives you a little bit more room. Well, it's a smaller needle, so now you can move it a little bit closer together. So it's really, when you talk about the limitation of how wide or how narrow you can make something, it's more of a limitation on the machine than anything else. That was my soapbox talk. I'll be quiet now.
It makes sense. I didn't even know that. And I always wondered why, because, back 14 years ago, I didn't know what the heck I was doing when I had my embroidery machine. So that makes sense why it was bird nesting. Don't forget to overlap for stitch elements that are next to each other.
Right. So I did, you're going to have your pull and your push. So all these edges that the satin finishes at, they're going to push out, and all these edges on the outside edges of the satin, they're going to pull in. So if I were to do everything exactly butt to butt, once it sews, they're going to pull away from each other, and they're going to be bigger gaps.
Right.
The petals, you may have gaps, you may not. So that's why there's some areas where I did leave some gaps. There's some areas that I did overlap. So when they actually sew, they are going to be pulling apart. I'd probably go through here, and I kind of started from one end and kind of whipped it around. And
I like how it looks, actually.
They're not, petals aren't going to be exactly the next ones on top of the next one as you go around. So I'd probably go through and resequence some of these so they may overlap differently.
Can you put the center on top and then change those greens to white for me so I can see it? Because, #visual person.
How's that?
See, I like that. I like it just the way it is, because that's exactly a daisy isn't uniform. It doesn't have to be. And then you could take that same daisy and literally move it all to all of them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what I can do is you can...
Makes me want to embroider it now.
You can duplicate that. You can rotate it so it's not exactly the same. Scale it. Put it underneath, resequence it. And of course, I'd go back under here and get rid of all these ones that are underneath here that are just going to sew on top of each other. Yeah. You definitely don't want to overlap stitches if you don't have to. But yeah, when this sews out, each individual satin is going to be hitting the light differently. So you're going to see these individual petals, the way it's sewn and the way the light hits it. If I were to say,
I'm kind of excited to see this happen. I ain't gonna lie.
So if I were to digitize, say, one shape where the satin stitch is coming parallel off this centerpiece, and say I just duplicated them and moved them around exactly the same. So you have this array of the same shape, same stitch direction. By the time they sew on top of each other, now you're just going to see kind of this one shape on the outside, but it's blending into each other.
But that looks really boring.
It's very boring. You know, if you purposely have something that's supposed to be symmetrical, exactly, you know, like you see a symmetrical sun with the same ray, same shape, same size all the way around.
Right.
But yeah, it's something where even when I was coming in here and you know, if you look at the stitch angle of this one, I have the stitches kind of going at this angle when the next one's coming a little bit more perpendicular to the center or parallel to the center, and this one has a little bend to it. So when I'm coming here and I'm purposely, and I can kind of go in each individual petal and change stitch angles as well.
Right.
But in such a small area, you're not going to want all these different weird angles.
So is that how it changes? I don't want to say gradient, just because I know that's not probably the proper term, but it changes how the light reflects off the thread, correct?
And it's the way that that the stitches next to each other are going to react to each other. So because if the angle of the stitches next to each other are exactly the same, they're going to fall into each other and it's going to look like one piece. But if you have stitches coming at different angles, they're going to lay on top of each other, and that way that the one on top does look on top. So the light's going to hit it differently, right. And you're going to differentiate the two elements that it might be the same color, but it's just the way the light hits it. So
I like
would you have done anything differently, Jeff?
He's not even paying attention.
Mildly. But, you know, it's because we approach things differently. I'd have actually made them wider and did fewer of them.
Fewer of them?
Yeah, and it would have just been, because when I was looking at it, you know, do the largest one. You start with the largest one and then made it smaller. And I just started with the smaller one and made it larger.
Gotcha.
Just because that way I don't have to worry about when I'm scaling down, now do I need to measure it or bump nodes? So that's the main difference that I would have done versus what we did.
And honestly, I kind of just did this on the fly. I didn't go in and do as much planning that I would do if this was a design that I was, you know, going to be sending to a customer. But yes, exactly what you're saying. Kind of go with the minimum first and scale up from there instead of scaling down, because as you're doing the act of scaling down, you don't know if you're going to cross that threshold of something being too small.
I know from a designer's point of view, I like how you went in and changed each petal to be slightly different from the other. There was really no two that were exactly alike, and I like that because it looks more natural. And so for me, from a designer's point of view, that looks more realistic to what I created originally. Right. So I wouldn't want it to be uniform in any sense of this word.
And, you know, and if this was, you know, something larger, say, and we had more room to kind of do some shading and whatnot, that's something where I'd come in here and you can just do come in here and choose where your light source is. Say that the light looks like it's coming from the top more than anywhere else. You can kind of come in here and just shade sides of the petals and kind of change up how they are sitting with the and something like that. On the size we're doing it at, I definitely wouldn't try to include something like that, but that is something where, you know, instead of having all these individual lines that you have in here, which are basically hitting the kind of the texture of the petals, but in embroidery, that's something like that where you can kind of come in here and shade.
Now, would you have done it in a different color, or would you have done it in like a white on white?
White is one of those things where if you are doing kind of a gradient or a half tone or a light density on top of each other, it's going to hide it, especially when you're kind of doing this technique where it's the same angle stitches on top of each other. It's just going to fall into each other. And this is where shading and gradients are really hard depending on the palette of thread that the embroiderer has. Something like that, because it is just a slight shadow to it, I would probably do like a lighter gray or a cream color. So it's there. Your eye's kind of catching that there's another color there, but it's not this stark white with a black shadow.
Right. So I could go in with a gray.
Right.
Because gray is the next progression of a shadow or a gradient. Right.
Yeah. So okay. like I have it shown there. It's kind of a light silvery gray with the white base. So something like that. And that's where, and again, when you're getting into shadowing and gradients, depending on how many levels of whatever color that you're trying to shade is going to really affect the end outcome in embroidery. You know, if you're trying to fade or shadow something that's navy blue, and the next blue, you only have another blue that's this really, really bright teal blue. Those colors aren't going to really blend well together. So.
And how long do you think that something like this would take you to digitize? I've got lots of questions, so I hope you're ready.
On a good day, and I have a plan and everything's going well, I would say this would probably take me about an hour at the most.
Okay. And I, just because there's people watching who have no idea about this isn't something that you can go in and resize to a bigger size and have it look correct.
To a certain degree. The rule of thumb I try to tell people, and again, this may be different from one design to another, but rule of thumb just in general, 10 to 15% is the max that I would go either down or up.
So this is measuring up at 3 inches right now. What would be the max?
So at what, 3 inches plus 10%, 3 inches plus 15%, which is my math. At the end of the day, I can't.
That's why I asked you.
So at 15% bigger, it'd be at just under 3.5 inches tall.
I mean, but really, that's very design specific, because like this one, it has a lot of smaller elements, so blowing it up is actually going to work better than shrinking it down. If you try to shrink this one down 10 or 15%, those elements are now going to drop all sub 1 millimeter. Some will drop sub 0.5 millimeter, and you're going to have issues on your machine. So a lot of people want like a hard and fast rule, and there's not one.
But there isn't one, right? And even though it technically could work from 3 to 3.5 inches tall, and it's not going to cause issues on the machine, but now all those areas that I removed detail and or like the number of petals, I may have been able to add a couple more petals knowing that I was at 3.5 inches tall from the get-go.
Right.
So I may have be able to add a little bit more detail here and there. Or I would have changed the stitch type, the underlay even. You know, there's certain underlays that I use for certain width satin stitches. And if I chose an underlay at the size that it was before and I scale up, and that's why a lot of times people, you know, they question, I have edits where I don't charge people if they need an edit to have something so properly from my original design. But if they say, oh, I needed this, it used to be 2.5 inches wide, I need it now 5 inches wide. And it's like, okay, well, there's going to be a revision fee. Oh, well, you're just scaling it. Well, it's not that simple, because I got to go through now and look at every element, make sure that underlays don't need to change, densities don't need to change, stitch types don't need to change. If stitch types are changing, that's when redigitizing starts coming into play. If I were digitizing this one with a running stitch outline, kind of that hard pen drawing look where there's a black outline over everything, and I scale it to a point where that outline now is not really doing the job, and I can go to a bolder satin stitch outline, well, now I have to completely redigitize the outline.
Right. I ask these questions just because you get a lot of newbies who are watching and they don't know the questions to ask.
Right, and there's even what's called registration, where that's where elements in embroidery, because you are working with a garment and there's going to be push and pull of the garment, there's going to be a little movement of that garment. You know, sewing something in a small 2-inch area, you can get away with kind of sewing the whole thing all at once, and your registration might not be an issue. But sewing something at 5 inches tall, you may not want to kind of sew the whole thing and try to come back and do all the detail and outlines after the fact, because by the time it sews from the bottom of the feet to the very top of the hat at 5 inches tall, that fabric or whatever that garment is going on may have shifted a little bit. So now you're going to have that kind of weird areas that may not be lining up properly. So even registration problems may occur changing the side, because I would have broken up into 2 pieces to make sure that the registration is correct.
So question, what if somebody came to you, and this is just hypothetical, said, I don't want all the colors, I want it in one color?
Well, the easiest way is just use the same thread for every single element that's digitized.
Right, but what would you say to them? So you could say, hey, listen, this is going to get lost. You're not going to see the detail because it is all one color.
Right.
So that would that cause you to maybe eliminate some things or add some things as a digitizer?
Well, I mean,
they say to you, it's all one color?
Even you as a designer, you know, if someone were to give you this and say, I want this white, you wouldn't just give them a blob of white that's in the
You're correct, but my business is definitely different from yours.
Right. But I mean, my question to them would be is, are you trying to do a tonal silhouette design of this? And to me, again, I could just do one flat fill in the shape of it. I would add some dimension. I would still kind of do those little outlines and shapes in there, so it's still going to give it some dimension, even though it is just a silhouette. Or if they are truly trying to see detail and they're trying to just do this as a one color outline, then that's a totally different approach.
Well, that's what I mean. That's the kind of questions you got to ask. Like, how many colors, you know?
So I'm going to come, and if they're saying, no, I want kind of this lined art of this gnome, and I want to see the nose and I want to see the outline of the hat, well, that's going to completely change the direction. And I'm just going to do outlines. And hopefully in the size that I'm doing it at, I'm going to be able to do satin stitch outlines to have this nice bold line that represents all the edges and nooks and crannies.
I know, I question, but I'm going to ask.
And that in itself, doing just an outline form of it, would force me to eliminate a lot more detail. Just trying to outline every single one of those petals, that's when I would really say, all right, you're going to see maybe 5 petals with a satin border instead of, you know, the 20 petals I could do individually, something like that.
Which also changes, again, the look of the design. So that's, again, you know, circling back to asking about the billion questions you need to ask when it comes to, do you want it to be in the same colors as this kind of thing? Is that how you plan on stitching it out? Or is it one of those things you want to cut down on the amount of colors? Because that's also a question and a topic. I mean, these are questions, as you know, for me to ask my digitizer, or your digitizer should be asking you. I mean, there's lots of questions that need to be asked. You can't just think that it's going to work, you know? And I'm only asking these questions. A lot of these answers are questions that I am asking the guys tonight are things I do actually know. I am not as stupid as I may be coming across, but I am asking them because we have a lot of newbies who are coming over from my group into their group who are looking to join embroidery. And one of the conversations is where to start at the beginning. And that's why I come in and I help out with them, because my group doesn't necessarily know. We're entering into a new uncharted territory for some of us.
Right.
And well, I was going to pull that comment up too. I was waiting for a break, but
sorry.
He says I had an issue with the stock design, changing colors and the pathing was shown through. So that's another element you have to watch for.
Right. Yeah. So if I were to have done this design at one point, and say like I did decide to do everything with an outline, you know, a stark black outline for everything, and you know this was the design that I sent to a customer, or I'm selling as a stock design, and they decide, well, there's an outline to it. All I have to do is delete all the fill stitches. Well, those fill stitches might be hiding a bunch of traveling stitches that I do with underlays or traveling from one area to another. So yes, on screen when you're looking at it, you don't see those stitches, but as soon as you delete that flower basket, well, now all the travel stitches from his shoes to his gloves to whatever it may be under there. So now there's a lot more editing that needs to be taking place. So
So that's actually something too that I don't know if a lot of people know this, but when you get to using glow-in-the-dark thread, when you're using glow-in-the-dark thread, it'll sew out and it'll look fine under light. You won't see any of the travels, you won't see any of the underlay, anything. It'll just lay down and it'll be nice, flat, fill. But when you actually turn off the lights, all of a sudden, all those traveling stitches underneath become visible because they're glowing out through the outside. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, I guess.
Right. So, long story short, in summation, I think having a good relationship with a digitizer and finding one that actually does, quality work just in general, you're gonna know their style. You're gonna know their capabilities of what they can and can't do. There's digitizers out there where I've done realistic things, like animals and dogs and stuff, and I've pulled off some really cool designs. But I know there's digitizers out there that are just ridiculously good at designs like that. But just run-of-the-mill designs, whether you're partnering with a designer like we are with Nikki to create stock designs, or you're using somebody with corporate designs only, and that you just do a lot of polo shirts or you do a lot of hats, whatever it may be, you get that good relationship with the digitizer. And if you do have the capabilities of creating artwork to show customers prior to digitizing, where you can show them exactly what they're going to see and how much detail they're going to see first, that's best case scenario.
Right.
That typically isn't what happens. I know there is a couple of customers I work with that are bigger kind of promotional companies that do everything from promotional products to embroidery. So they do have an in-house artist. But even then, I may get art from him that he designed something for screen printing a year ago, and they just need to understand, all right, do what you need to do. These are the things that are important that the customer asks if we can include, but do your best to include what you can. And if you have that good digitizer and that their capabilities are, like what my frame of mind is to make sure that the designs get to represent what the original art is as close as possible through my interpretation. The quality is going to be there as far as the way it's going to look when sewn out. The efficiency for production to make sure that your machines are running at the speeds, at the capacity that they can, and not have any problems. Those are the things that kind of go into my frame of mind when I'm planning out a design for somebody. And I may look at this design a little bit differently as a stock design, where I may make decisions on it that I wouldn't necessarily do, where I know this is a design that's going into a large production house that needs to have their machines running efficiently. I may make some decisions differently because I know what the end result or the end usage is going to be. So trust your digitizer if you find a good one. Have those conversations of what you can and can't do. Most of my customers kind of say, hey, we trust you, do what you can. There is conversations where I do kind of go back and forth, especially with newer customers, that they send me a design and they're like, no, I want that. It's not going to work. I'm just telling you right now, it's not going to work. But let's try to discuss how we can make it work to kind of find that happy medium.
I mean, that was something that when I started doing designs with Jeff, we would go back and forth on this conversation, and me trying to explain what I want and him trying to do what I want, until you get in a rhythm, and learning each other, because that's just something that we had to do. We're getting there. And now I'm learning, the terminology he wants it, because I have screen print and, HTV. I have all different types of terminology in my head. Now I'm going to add this in there, and trying to get him to understand what I'm coming across with is, you build a relationship, and it takes time. Don't think that you're going to come right out of the gate though and think that you're going to have this instant connection with your digitizer. It's not going to happen. They have to learn you, your style, everything that you are as a client. That's why you stay with a good digitizer. Because as time goes on, you guys will have this working relationship. You'll just know, You'll know what they want, how they want it, and everybody's different. So hook up with a good digitizer. That's all I have to say.
Exactly.
I'm lucky.
There's a design that we were doing that it's a V, but the V is made up of just dots that we screen print, and there's no problem. Then it turned into embroidery, and the nightmare of sewing a dot, trimming, sewing a dot, trimming, sewing a dot. And
not it.
they just recently said, oh, the guys are, they wanted to wear something hip. We're thinking about doing 3D puff-on hats. And I said, then you need to completely redesign your logo. Because if you think you're going to get these 3mm dots and 20 or 30 of them on a 3D puff, yeah, it's not going to happen. So,
tag on it, Blue. I don't even want to even think about that one.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's just a matter of they see a hat or they see a design or they see it and they're like, oh, that is so cool. I want my logo like that. And they don't look at the working elements of creating a design and making it into a certain substrate or type of embroidery or whatever it may be.
Right. Well, that's the thing. That's why you have to build those relationships. So, and for you to be able to say, no, that ain't going to work. You know, that's just not, because some clients you can look at and go, that's not going to work. And they get all up in arms. But if they're a good client, they're going to be like, okay, you know what you're talking about. There's trust there. So
if you're my customer and I tell you it's not going to work, it's not because I'm lazy. It's not because I don't want to do it. It's not because I don't want to see you succeed. It's because I know in the 28 years of me doing this, there's one reason or another that is not best case scenario for you end result. It's not going to sew right. It's going to give you problems on the machine. It's not going to be efficient on the machine. It's going to drive your operators completely crazy, whatever it may be. That's the reason why I'm warning you ahead of time that something's not going to work. Right.
So you guys can, I've told this over at my group and I'll say it over here. If you do need designs made, I can sit down and make them for you and then pass them off to the guys if that's what you need to have digitized. There'll be 1,001 questions from me and 1,001 questions from them. So just keep that, and I'll try to cut down the 1,001 questions when I'm on the back end asking them. But if I'm here, if anybody needs me, I've been doing this for, a few years now, and I could say I have a successful design shop. So if you ever need that, it's awfully quiet. Your people are quiet.
You'll wake them up.
You're so bold. Oh my goodness. Have you ever given a here? There you go. I think that's Ramona.
Yeah, I have. Have you ever given a customer what they want and then send a second file of what you know will work and have them test and pick the one they like?
When I've had the conversation of someone demanding something was to be done and I knew that it wouldn't be, yes, I did do that. Just to kind of show them, say, look, this is why I told you it couldn't be done. And this is my version of what I would have done if you would have just trusted in my, recommendations. So yes, I have done that. And again, I think these are just, teaching tools to let people see what can and can't be done, and especially if they're new to the industry or new to embroidery or whatever it may be that they're doing. So,
and that's across the board and in any sort of apparel printing. Trust the people that are in the industry. I mean, if we've been in here for a while, we've seen a thing or two, trust us. We might look at you, especially like over my world. I'm like, go ahead, but I'm going to tell you, this is how it's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. When they come back to me and go, well, this happened. I know, that's why we started over. Thanks. Now let's get back to work, kind of thing. And it happens no matter what industry you're in.
There's been a couple times where, in our lives or whatnot, or questions on webinars, someone's brought up something I've never thought of. And it's like, try it.
Yep.
Try it and see if it works. If it works, that's something that goes in my brain, and I know that I'm going to be able to use it next time. So.
Right. I mean, that's where I think outside the box moments happen, and somebody managed to find something out of a flub because it worked, and now it becomes a standard. That's with a lot of things, and it doesn't matter what you do in your business. So Justin's dying still. I just want y'all to know that.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. I still have my cough every now and then, not as bad as yours. So there you go.
Although he does look like he feels a lot better.
Yeah, it doesn't look like death warmed over.
No, not anymore.
No, that's good. So, boys, what is your ending comments on this whole thing? Because you are in an hour.
Trust the digitizing. If you found a good one that you built a relationship with, trust to what they're saying that can and can be done. That's what it boils down to. And like I said, if you have the capabilities of creating the artwork beforehand, have those discussions with them to understand and learn what it can be done. So when you're designing strictly for embroidery, you can start from the get-go.
Right. Jeff?
Yeah. I would say if you're not sure, if they say, no, that's not work, it's too small, you can always ask them why. Because like I said earlier with the explanation of the needle, that's, some people might go, well, you just don't want to do it that small. But when you explain it that way, they go, oh, well, it really can't be done. You know what I mean? So you're going to have if you have that good relationship with your digitizer and you've gone back and forth on a few designs and you really, you like their work, they listen to you and you tell them stuff. If they do come back and tell you, you can say, can you help me understand why not? Because a lot of times they'll go back and they'll explain that kind of stuff to you. If you don't ask why not, you probably won't think about it again in the future, and you'll just send another piece of art with that same kind of thing in it, and that you'll get, no, that can't be done. And yeah, you'll learn it, but you'll always kind of sit there and wonder, why, right? So just kind of trust that process.
So is there a tip you guys could give as an end for your live today? Is there one tip? I know I'm putting you on the spot because I didn't even say that I was going to do this, but is there one tip you could offer them?
Use fat column text.
If you can avoid text sub 5 millimeters, do so. That's probably the number one rule when it comes to text and embroidery. 5 millimeters is the minimum you want to. Again, there are cases where you can kind of get away with something differently, but I think that's a general rule that if you could stick to 5 millimeters tall for your text, then more than likely it'll work out.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for letting me hang out with you guys for the last 2 weeks while Matt's been away. Matt's going to come back. You're very welcome. Very, very welcome. Thanks for letting me hang out.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and close this out unless you guys have something else.
Close it out, Jeff.
Okay. Do it.
I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works. We have Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios and Nikki Adamkovich from The Sassy Subber. We are all here representing the Embroidery Nerd, and we'd like to thank you guys for hanging out with us, and we'll catch you next time.
Good night, everybody.